victory and the agony of defeat.
Madison, great ball around the corner, Penasini, he beats them all! Junior Polar out wide, bumped away from Trindle, Sharks coming through, none of them can hold this!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host John, also known as 4020. Joining me to preview another full slate of games on the weekend is my good mate Sixties. Big fella, Eels still hunting their breakthrough NRL win under Jason Ryles, but there's reason to think that we might be a little bit closer this week with the injuries to our rivals and maybe some progress for the Parramatta Eels. But before we get to that, before we talk Jersey Flegg, New South Wales Cup, and of course NRL, quick check-in on you, mate. How you doing? And what I have to say is actually kind of warm conditions today as we record on a Thursday.
Yeah, fresh from Eels training. Just checking out what was happening up there today. So, yeah, very warm conditions at Kellyville. I'm with you on this, John, that I think you will see improvement from the team this week. We have to, let's be honest. But before we go any further into this, just a reminder, no matter what platform you're listening to this on or watching us on, if you can give it a like and subscribe, that really does help. We appreciate the fact, too, that we are getting people who are doing that, especially on our YouTube platform. It's the numbers there are really growing nicely, and the number of subscribers are growing. But we've switched to this video format, and we hope that that is something that is something that you've liked. We've been so reluctant to put our faces on the screen for so long. So, yeah, maybe be kind. I don't know. But anyway, no matter what you're watching on or listening on, give it a like and subscribe. Thank you also to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. And, of course, to the home of the Eels, Parramatta Leagues Club, where this week we will be there before the game. We're pre-game with every appearance now. We won't be able to have, unless we have a surprise this week, but it's the Eels player reunion this week. So they're all going to be elsewhere in Parramatta Leagues Club, enjoying a feed, a few drinks, a few yarns, of course. Those tries were, they went for a lot more metres, a lot more yards maybe than the reality, but that's all part of stretching the truth a little bit in these catch-ups. Also, don't forget they'll be doing their lap of honour over at the stadium, so give all those players who dug the well, all these former players who dug the well for the Eels today, show them your appreciation as they give that walk around Parramatta CommBank Stadium there at Parramatta. And, but we'll see you in there. 1:45 p.m. in Stirlows. We'll be giving an in-depth preview of the game. And we always enjoy it when people come up and introduce themselves and let us know where they're listening from. And because we did have, as we said the other night, we had Josh there from Queensland. We had Max and Sue there from Maitland. We had quite a few people that were coming over and introducing themselves. Barry, who I've still got to put up photos on the socials of his Eels premiership rings that he had specially made. So, look, it's always great to meet some of our listeners and hear their story about where they listen from and when they listen. Sometimes it's those long drives if they're regional supporters of the Eels who make the long hike every match day to come and watch the Eels. And it's always great to hear that we accompany them on their long drives from those areas to Parramatta on the weekend. So look forward to seeing you there. Stirlows 1:45 on Sunday. So, John, without any further ado, let's get into the Jersey Flegg preview.
Yeah, so this one is a standalone game as opposed to New South Wales Cup and NRL, who are actually paired up this weekend out at CommBank Stadium, which always great to have a curtain raiser game to the NRL, and it was certainly something that it wouldn't have impacted the NRL game in terms of the results, Sixties, but we felt it, didn't we, last week, having no curtain raiser at the stadium itself with the Cup playing out at Ringrose Park. But this week, the Flegg, they returned to New Era Stadium where they faced the Canterbury Bulldogs in the under-21s. Eels coming off a narrow defeat to the West's Tigers, where in the testing conditions out at Parramatta last week, they faded just a little bit and let victory slip through their fingers. So they'll be looking to improve on that result and challenge Canterbury. If I have a quick gander at the ladder, did Canterbury get a first start win, 60s? Jersey Flegg. The Bulldogs did win. So, yeah, they started with a 2-point win over whoever they played. Who's got a 2-point differential against them? I could not tell you, apparently. So, anyway, the Dogs first up winners. And no, they've also lost the game, so that's why. I can't count the 3, apparently. Anyway, the Eels, they look like this, mate. At fullback, it's Jaden Mbechi, who we had our first look at last week, and I thought he was actually pretty handy in the custodial role. On the wings, Tavaka Palu comes in for Noah Totoa. He'll start on the left wing, I believe, with Bradley Avery on the right. In the centres, we got used to these guys, so it's Antioch Fatal and Mariner, and Araz Namba as a couple of very familiar faces there, 60s. In the half, speaking of familiar faces, Arpa Twiddle at 5'8". He partners Matthew Hunter, and they've been working pretty much interchangeably on both sides of the field, so be interesting to see how they get deployed against the Bulldogs. In the front row, we see Damascus Nemia and Tiankan Brown as the starting bookends, Jack Hudson at dummy half. Back row, Dom Destratus will be on the left, Tyrese Lakini on the right. Saxon Pryke has been named here to start in Flegg, but I believe he is still also part of that Cup bench, so something to monitor on Saturday to see whether he plays there. So just give that some consideration. And then on the bench, you got Patrick Spence, Jaywin Taewa, Raf Destratus, Dom's brother there, and then Ieti Samuelu, extended roster, Jonah Sullivan, and Jai Camilleri, the dummy half. So 1 o'clock p.m. out at New Era Stadium, mate. Eels, I mean, they had a good win against, I say good win. It was a solid win against the Silk Tails in very challenging conditions at Lidcombe a couple of weeks ago, and then could have easily beaten the Tigers, but let it slip through their fingers. So their form line's not terrible coming into this one. And we know the Bulldogs will play tough because they always aim up in these junior clashes, even up to under-21s, these junior clashes against the Parramatta Eels. But the Eels, I think, they do have the personnel here to legitimately challenge for victory.
Yeah, John, probably the most frustrating thing is the fact that it's an impossibility for us to cover this game with the time that this is being staged. When you've got the Jersey Flegg Cup game that's on at the same time as the SG Ball will be played, and what was the kickoff again for the girls? Were they like 1 or 1:30, something like that, out at Leichhardt? It's just
they were.
Yeah.
Girls kick off at 1 o'clock in the Lisa Fiala.
There you go. So we've got 2 games kicking off at the same time, 2 Eels matches, and a third that'll be about halfway through when it's kick-off in the Jersey Flegg. So that's disappointing for us because we really love to be able to bring you, the Eels supporters who passionately follow the lower grades, or even if you don't passionately follow it, you're really keen to hear how certain players are going. And given there were a number of these players who were involved in the Eels pre-season in some way, either playing in a trial or participating actually in the pre-season itself. Mm-hmm. And look, it is a strong Eels team in that regard. The pack, I mean, that's as strong as you're going to get in Jersey Flegg. And when you're talking about the pre-season, to have both Araz Nanva, who played in the trial against the Knights, and then, of course, Arpa Twiddle, who was involved, I think, in both trials. Was he not? He was definitely involved in the Tigers.
He ended up starting against the Tigers. Yeah. So
yeah, that's right. And I'm just trying to think. He did get a start as well in the not in the starting team, but in the Newcastle game. Yeah. 100%. So and he's a player that a lot of Eels supporters have an interest in following. And so look, I think last week was a game that got away from the Eels, as you covered, and we don't want to go into the review because we've already had the review. But again, it comes down to those little things, just making sure that if you're in control of the match, you keep control of the match. Don't give opportunities for momentum swings through errors or or just not completing the set to the best of your ability. Sometimes you could complete the set, but you might have a very ordinary completion. So we want to make sure that the Eels are on top of their game, because you just don't want to see them throw points away. And it was so costly last year because they were easily the best team in the run through to the finals last year, and would have done some damage in finals football, but missing out on points across those first 7 rounds last year ended up really costly. John, anything you want to add to what you have to say about the Jersey Flegg? You've been watching them really closely over the last couple of weeks.
No, I really like some of the combinations building here. I think that Dom Lestratus and Matty Hunter are really cooking down that left edge. Dom's been a blog favourite, TCT favourite for a number of years, going through the reps. He's not just an effort player. You can see some legitimate, game-breaking ability on the edge there. But he's shown positional versatility in the past. He's played almost entire seasons in the backline 60s. But back in his preferred position on the edge and doing really well there. I love what Tiankin Brown did in the front row last week. Jack Hudson stays busy at dummy half. Bradley Avery's been good on the right flank. So I already shouted out Jaden Mbichi as well. Yeah, so obviously good talent across the park there for the Flegg 60s. It's just a matter of getting all those little dottings of I's and crossings of T's in the football sense, and not having those late game lapses, which, I'm speaking anecdotally, but it feels like the timekeeping has been really weird in second halves of Flegg games in the first 2 weeks. So maybe that's a contributing factor, but you always want to control what you can control, and there's no doubt that the Eels sort of slipped out of gear late in the game against the Tigers. So if they stick to business and they get on top of their sets, their completions, their field position stuff, I think that they can really push the Bulldogs here, and no reason to think why they can't get the win on Saturday.
Yeah, look, I agree there. It's a weird thing with those, as you said, those second half minutes. It's have to go back and have a look at the tape and see how that is actually playing out, because you'd have to think if something's going wrong, people would be all over that. It'd have to be. So, but anyway, okay, well, that now brings us through to the second game under the auspices of the New South Wales Rugby League, being the New South Wales Cup, where the Eels started their season last week with a victory at Ringrose Park. A number of good performances there that we wanted to talk about. I've had a little bit of feedback from people who did go to the game or watched it streamed, and there was some levels of disappointment from those people. I thought it was a relatively tidy game at that level. Obviously, we expected that with the team that the Eels named, especially in the forwards, that they would be far too strong for the West side. But it wasn't a bad game of football. So it's an equally strong, well, almost equally strong team this week. John, can you just run through the Eels team sheet?
Yeah, a couple of changes. I believe one on the back of suspension. I think that Woody Wiramu Greg is out. I'm not sure what the nature of the suspension is, but I think it might be a week 60s. And then Bryce Cartwright, I think, is a bit nicked up, so he's out of action this week, which means the Eels look like this. At fullback, you got Joash Papali looking to build on was a very good opening game of the season in New South Wales Cup last week. And speaking of very good games, probably the player that eclipsed Joash's efforts was Hayes Dunstan. He was fantastic on the right wing, so great to see Hayes back in full flight there, and he had an awesome game against Western Suburbs. He'll go down that right edge alongside Bailey Simonson 60, so that's a big in there for the Parramatta Eels. Bailey looking to build back to his eventual NRL return. Comes back via New South Wales Cup in what's probably a sensible decision to get some solid minutes under his belt and not pressure him too much to take on what will be a pretty violent Canterbury pack and backline in the NRL. So good to see Bailey back in action. And then speaking of the rest of the backline, you got Arthur Miller-Stephen named on the left wing with Samuel Luiziu in the centres. And then moving to the halves, Joshua Lynn gets to reprise his role in the number 6 this week after doing a very good job there against the Magpies. But he'll partner Ronald Volkman this week because obviously Dean Hawkins is getting his club debut for the Parramatta Eels in the NRL. So a new look halves configuration there for the Eels, and probably one closer to what they were expecting initially, because Dean, I mean, obviously Mitchell Moses was meant to play NRL from round 1, but Dean Hawkins was his actual replacement, but was banged up with a bit of a calf strain, I think it was 60s, which led to Ronnie Volkman getting the shot. Now Ronnie gets a chance to go back and ply his trade in the New South Wales Cup and continue to hone his skills, which is a good thing. And then he'll be playing behind a pack that looks like this, with Brock Parker and Tony Mattielli getting the starts this week, which is good to see. A couple of young bookends there who could make an impression in the NRL down the track. Joey Lussick starts at dummy half. And then on the edges, you've got Kelma Tuolangi and Dan Keir, who I believe is also the captain for the team. And at lock forward, young player Charlie Geimer there, looking to work his way back towards the NRL as well. So good chance here for a few players to impress alongside Parker, Mattielli, Tuolangi, Geimer, and even Dan Keir 60s, who, I tell you what, having a wholehearted player who just runs and tackles hard would go a long way in the NRL right now. And then,
and it's no surprise to see him handed the C next to him.
That was a big part of his game last year too. He elevated himself in that capacity as a leader for the team. And with Dean Hawkins out, who was another prime candidate for the captaincy, it made sense for Dan Keir to step up. And then on the interchange, rounding it out, Manny Luke is your dummy half utility. Then you got a trio of young players, Will Latu, Saxon Pryke, and Max Tupou. Saxon named in 2 grades, as we alluded to earlier, 60s, so there's some propensity there for a change, which could also be by way of Ryan Madison or Ryan Madison adjacent, because Maddo has been named in a floating capacity this week. I jokingly called it Schrodinger's eel or a NRL superposition, where he's in a state of flux until we can observe him on Sunday, where he's neither playing NRL nor not playing NRL. So whatever happens around Madison, whether he plays NRL or if he goes back to Cup, will cause potentially a cascading flow down that could impact the likes of Pryke and Tupou. So just keep an eye on that one. But that's obviously Sunday late mail sort of stuff right there.
Yeah, absolutely. John, it was, as I said, I thought a solid performance last week from the New South Wales Cup team. Outside of the possibility of a couple of late changes to this team, you'd expect that with the players that they've named, that they're going to be too strong in this match. But games aren't won on paper, as we know, and it's going to be a matter of producing their best. Now, you would think there's an incentive there for all players, because already Jason Ryles has shown that if the players don't perform in NRL, that he'll make change. And we've had a couple of changes across the first 2 rounds. There is, if you show the form, there's a chance of being called up into first grade. And Hayes was the interesting one last week, because we saw some of the old Hayes Dunster, that player who was exceptional in yardage, the player who would always beat that first defender. And he's a player that's, he's had a long road back, and he's done a lot of rehab time, even in this preseason just gone. But he's progressed well through his rehab. Last week showed that he's probably got the confidence back as well. Just the way that he played, he didn't shy away from anything last week. So that was good to see. Joe Ash, what I really liked from him, he's known as a flashy player, but he saved a couple of tries with his defence last week. So that was really good from him. Ronnie Volkman dropped back from the NRL, but what we have to remember with Ronnie is that he only had about 5 or 6 games of NRL experience behind him anyway when he came in, when he was called into the NRL team, and he was out for the entire season last year. I think consolidation of playing football should be that first goal for him, and it was really a case of, well, who do the Eels bring in if they don't bring in Ron? Even if the coaches would have preferred for him to find his feet in New South Wales Cup. With Dean Hawkins out, he had to be used for the absence of Mitch Moses. So, look, we're really happy about the form of some of the players. Tony Mattielli had a great pre-season, carried that into a really solid performance last week. He gets the start this week. Will Latu, good impact off the bench last week.
Yeah, Bryce Cartwright
in that role.
Yeah, with Bryce Cartwright out, there's probably expanded opportunities now for Will to, sort of open that window a little bit. But big week for Tony Mattielli, mate. top 30 contracted, so no roster restrictions in picking him. The Eels need some fire through the middle, and can he be that guy as a young bull to come in with a bit of hunger?
Yep, absolutely. And as I said, I think if players show that they have that capacity to play, not just with high energy, but with the toughness that they're probably looking for in that first grade team, the coaches have shown they're prepared to give the young players a go. So anyway, I'll tip the Eels to continue their winning ways in this grade. You, John?
Yes. You know that the Dogs are always going to be tough in a phase.
They are going to be tough. Yep, they are.
I've got the Parramatta team list up here. If I just quickly pull up the match centre over here, hopefully it has the Dogs. So look, the Dogs. I see Blake Taff. I see Danny Gabriel is, I believe, the brother of Luke, who is the highly rated player now at Cronulla, the Shire. But you got Drew Hutchinson. You got Hapoi, who's a very good young forward. Curtis Morin, who is also in the mix for NRL, so I'm not sure if he'll play there. But Tom Amone. So they've got enough seasoned players in there alongside their young players to ask a lot of questions.
They've been strong the last couple of years in New South Wales.
They have been. They've been building really nicely, and it's been part of the sort of MO of Phil Gould and Cameron Serrato. You don't just want a strong NRL team. Obviously, you want a strong reserve grade team because of the whole idea that iron sharpens iron, that having more quality and pushing you in your repose sessions also helps there too, and just having a strong pathway. So I think the Eels can get this one done. 60s. I think playing at CommBank will be a really nice boost for our boys. Playing in front of what should hopefully be a reasonable crowd there. I'm not expecting a sellout for New South Wales Cup early on, but there'll be a few thousand people there watching the game, which is always nice as opposed to playing park football.
But of course, that'll only be after they've watched us over at Parramatta Leagues Club with our big NRL preview. So you're probably going to get that stampede over there about half time of the New South Wales Cup, John.
Exactly, mate, exactly. And we definitely won't have the New South Wales Cup being live streamed on a device while we're trying to chat. So, definitely not. But yes, if you are at PLC, make sure to catch us in the pre-game show, of course. But equally, the game kicks off here at 1:30 p.m. So I understand if your priorities are split here. I do understand. All right, mate.
Okay, now that brings us to the big one, the NRL game between the traditional rivals, the Eels and the Bulldogs. Yes. Let's take it through the Bulldogs team list first of all, John.
Yeah, Bulldogs, one of, 5 undefeated teams left now? Storm, who had the bye, and obviously the round 1 victory over Parramatta, Canberra, Canterbury, Newcastle, and South Sydney. So there you go. Bulldogs still part of that last man standing package. They look like this. Couple of changes because of a couple of knee injuries to star players in Matt Burton and Viliami Kikau, which leads to their back line looking like this. Connor Tracy at fullback, Blake Wilson and Marcelo Montoya on the wings, Bronson Sherry and Stephen Crichton, their captain and our centre there. Bailey Hayward steps into the halves to replace Matty Burton, and he'll partner Toby Sexton. In the front row, we've got Max King, Reid Marnie and Josh Curran, a couple of former Eels there in Marnie and Curran. In the back row, Satili Tupanua is the first man up to replace Viliami Kikau, pretty handy player in his own right, but certainly no bootstraps Bill, who is one of the game's best back rowers. But he'll work opposite, of Jacob Preston on the edges. Jamin Salmon, another former Eel there. He'll be at lock forward. On the interchange, you've got Kurt Mann, Harry Hayes, a young forward, Daniel Saluka for feeder, and Curtis Morin. So I did just mention Morin named in Cup. Looks like they'll probably have to replace him. And then their extended roster, Joseph O'Neill, Jack Todd, Blake Taff, Luke Smith, and then Jonathan Sewer. And then calling this game is Wyatt Raymond, and in the box is Jared Sutton. So probably on the more neutral packages in terms of the officials this week, 60s.
Yeah, let's just jump straight into the Eels team list now.
Okay, so Jason Ryles rewarding his young troops, the guys that have actually put their hands up and put in a bit of effort, and that sees the team look like this. On the wings, at fullback, Isaiah Yongi is the number 1, and hopefully the team are a little less porous up front, 60s, because the poor man has been trying to cut down try savers every time, it feels like, in these last 2 games. But on the wings, named right now provisionally is Sean Russell on the left and Jordan Samrani on the right, which means Will Penasini and Zach Lomax are in the centres. No Josh Adokar named in the starting back line, but we'll get to him shortly because he is in the extended roster. Dylan Brown will partner Dean Hawkins in the halves. Obviously, we need to see more from Dylan 60s. He's been, for a number of reasons, at the forefront of Parramatta discourse, both for signing elsewhere in 2026 with the Newcastle Knights, which it's now a fait accompli. We move on from that, but more so for his form on the field right now, where I think he's probably having a career worst series of games here for the Eels. So I need to find another gear, from Dillbags. And then, of course, Dean Hawkins, the hope here is that he can help provide a bit more stability in the halves, a bit more of a voice on the field and help guide the team through set-to-set situations. Then in the front row, we've got Joe Ofengahi and Junior Barlaw, with Brendan Hansen at number 9 in what is an unchanged starting front row. And then Sean Lane on the left, Jack Williams on the right, and Jermaine Hopgood at lock forward round out what I believe is an unchanged backline based on what we saw against the Tigers. And then moving to the interchange, Riley Smith, Matt Dury, Gideon Katonga and Sam Tuivasa. So a lot of young players there. Obviously, Riley and Sam playing their third NRL games. Gideon not too far ahead of them, honestly. He's still single digits in his NRL career. And then
unchanged interchange.
Yes, it's an unchanged interchange. So I think those 4 players were some of the Eels' better players against the West Tigers. So no surprises that Ryles is sticking and picking there. But then we go to the extended roster. Some intriguing opportunities and possibilities there. Ryan Madison, not named in the New South Wales Cup, could be a possibility here. Could also just be the 18th man. Dan Keir did not play in the Cup last week, 60s, because he was 18th man to the NRL. And you got Joash Papali, Dan Keir, who I just mentioned, Josh Adokar, who I spoke about earlier, and Joey Lussick. So a couple of big questions here. The media were all over the fact that Josh Adokar was not named to start. Certainly there's going to be a lot of talk as the official roster cut down comes in the coming couple of days as to who sticks into those final 2 slots and whether Josh Adokar is there and whether he sneaks into the starting team at some point. But it does add an entertaining subtext to this game with Jason Ryles playing a couple of mind games maybe. But how do you see this team with 60s? Because Ryles has, at least on the initial surface value, has chosen some loyalty between rounds 2 and 3 after bringing in changes between rounds 1 and 2. Is he giving guys a chance to stand up with stability here, or do you think there's going to be a change or two to this roster?
Look, the media's been all over the potential change with the Fox. He hasn't been named in the lower grades.
Yep.
You'd think he's playing against his old club. There's not a fitness issue with him, you would think, although he hasn't played since he didn't get very many minutes in that trial, did he? So
way less than I thought he would. Yeah, I was a bit surprised.
Yeah. So maybe there's a little bit of doubt hanging over his head, but you'd have to think if there's any chance that he's ready to go, that the Eels will make a late change there.
It's there is a. I mean, I agree, and I think him coming into this lineup is part of what is a fascinating little subplot to this game, because you talk about. Well, I spoke about how many former Eels were in that Canterbury lineup, and there are a few. Go back through it. Sorry, you've obviously got the front row pairing of Marnie and Curran, Jamin Salmon, and then was there someone else I missed there? No, because Montoya's not a Parramatta Eel. So there's a few Eels there, but equally so for the Eels. You go through our team. Jordan Samrani, you've got Matt Dury, having spent time at the Bulldogs as a Parramatta junior, Gideon Katonga, Josh Adokar, who we spoke about. Anyone else I missed there? No, I think, but there's 4 or so Eels there with a bit of ties to Canterbury, so it's a revenge game on that side as well, and maybe that's the sort of fire the Eels need right now.
Look, I think one thing you can't question is that, first of all, the younger players and the new players have been giving everything that they've got in these opening rounds. What's been disappointing is maybe some of the incumbents in the Eels team are still stuck in some older defensive systems, some older habits, and you can't have your foot in both camps or in both systems, as it were. And I spoke to you a couple of weeks back, John, about my concern, about if you're under pressure, there might be that tendency to go back to what you knew rather than what you currently know. And I think we saw that. I think we saw that with the basic try that the Tigers started out with last week, because it was simply a right side shift and the Eels backed away. Like, you just saw them back away, and that's not how they've been prepared. They're not that's not part of the system, the defensive system, to back away like that. So we saw that, and I think we ended up seeing that far too often. It was a very passive defensive line, and they really need to be so much more aggressive in defence. Now, if you can't get a match against the Bulldogs, a traditional rival, to bring out a bit of fire in the team, I'm not sure what you can, because it certainly brings out the emotions in the supporters. I know, John, that within your own family, there are
a very healthy divide between Eels and Bulldogs fans. Yeah,
and you're not Robinson Crusoe. Your family's not Robinson Crusoe in Western Sydney when it comes to that. You've got households that are split. Shelley wrote about it as well this week, about it's such a rivalry, and the fan bases are overlap so much that you do get those internal rivalries within the families. It's a bit of a grudge match, and bragging rights are up for the different supporters. So if the players can't draw something from the anticipation from fans, I'm not sure what will motivate them.
And look, going back to 22 60s, when we made the grand final and the Dogs were at the very bottom of like their descent into the cellar, going back to round 14, they beat us 34-4. They turned up massively in what was absolutely, like, we called it their grand final back when we covered this game. It was their season grand final in the middle of a year, and they absolutely demolished the Eels. And I remember how poor we played in that game, because the Dogs were just so aggressive. They were so disruptive. They were so just trying to spoil and quite literally get into a dogfight there. And maybe that's the blueprint for the Parramatta Eels this week.
It was a stunning loss back then, wasn't it? It was,
yeah.
It was sitting out there at Acor, and just, you knew from fairly early on that the Dogs were there to play. They made their statement early in the game, and it was embarrassing, the result in the end, and especially the way the Bulldog supporters were giving it to us out there on match day.
They're not shy about having a chat.
No, they're not. They're not shy about letting you know what they think about the team that you support, and they're already been giving it to Eels supporters in the lead up to this game. And why not? They're the ones with the bragging rights right now, because they've started off the season really well, and even with a couple of key players out, their confidence is going to be sky high. The Eels are in the opposite camp. They've got to get their headspace switched on from a positive perspective, because it's understandable. If you first of all, we know it was the Storm, but if you start the season with a flogging where you just didn't turn up, and to be down 46-6 at halftime was atrocious. But to back that up with the first game at home in front of your home fans, in a match where insipid is the best way to describe what happened, execution inept, and systems not in evidence. So to be walloped by a team that performed as poorly as the Tigers did on that day, forget about the scoreline. The remarkable thing about the scoreline is it flattered two teams. It flattered the winners, and it also flattered the losers. Like, we didn't deserve to score 6 points. Like, I couldn't see where a try was coming from. And we know that if we were playing a red-hot team again, that it would have got extra ugly. It was ugly enough, but it would have got extra ugly. That's the reality of where we sit at the moment. So John, what do we need from our Eels this week? There's going to be some Captain Obvious statements that you and I are going to make, but what have we got to see from the Eels to turn the results around?
Line speed, some aggression and defense, and carrying the ball, which means when you're defending, you need to be fighting to get them on their back to, spoil the ruck. In attack, that means you'll be pushing up in support for your fellow forwards. It means that when someone's running an edge line down the left or right corridors, that they're not in isolation. And the center or the fullback or the winger, the half, someone's pushing up, opening up opportunities to offload. We need to see just some common sense football. Getting to your kicking to the corners, holding on to the ball, and you're going to
all the 1-0 and stuff.
Exactly, and you're going to make mistakes. No one can. I know that, I think the Warriors might have had a game where they completed it 98% or something in recent years where, the commentators are losing their minds. The reality is you're not going to complete it 100% and you're going to make mistakes, but, don't drop the ball inside your own 20. Drop the ball inside the attacking half if you're going to drop the ball. Those little things, they add up because it leads to massive swings in the territorial battle. It leads to changes in the flow of possession. So these are all absolute Rugby League 101. And I think from a coaching perspective, from a form perspective, that is where the Eels are at right now. That they're very much in a reset the mind, reset the body sort of phase after the first 2 rounds. But there is also more, tactical and nuanced stuff that we can be doing. And I hope that with Dean Hawkins now at the helm, we can execute a little bit more effectively in that regard. If we're talking about kicking early, and trying to influence the how the 2 packs sort of start the game in that regard. We're going to need Dean Hawkins to be quite astute in that regard. And then in terms of players you're trying to pick out, Sitili Tupanua is coming into this team. He is a great ball carrier, but not a stronger defender as Viliama Kikau, which means there could be some opportunities there. Likewise, you got Bailey Hayward coming into the halves. I'm just trying to think, how do the Dogs configure their halves? Does Toby Sexton play? He plays down the left, I believe, right? Because Matt Burton plays down the right. So if that's the case, then Hayward's down the right. So they've got to change on either side if that's the case, because Kikau's their left edge back rower. So, you've got new faces. If I'm correct there, you've got new faces on both sides of the ruck to attack. And they're going to be giving their all because of the way the Bulldogs play. But just those little degrees of infamiliarity defensively can make a difference, and that's potentially some threads for the Eels to pick at. So they're the things that immediately come to mind. But
can I add another Rugby League 101? Communication.
Oh God, yes. Like
the talk out there has to be so much better.
So much.
And we'll throw into that. We need the senior players to step up in terms of their leadership.
Yeah, and leadership as voices, leadership with action. Junior and Joe, they're not prolific speakers, right? But they can speak through their actions. And I need them to start fronting up and being violent and physical through the ruck. Their first predilection when they get the ball, whether it's via a pass in the ruck or via second phase play, don't worry about shifting the ball. Like, obviously, if there is a 5-on-3 overlap, I want you to pass the ball. But if you're getting the ball from a relatively neutral script through the middle corridor, inside the attacking 30 or 40, I don't want you going, oh, well, I've got the ball, let's hot potato it to Sean Lane down the left. No, just rip in. Like that, just keep it simple. Just, tear some heads off.
Now, it's not getting really complex with this either, but where we, want to see the forwards that carry the ball and rip in, I also want to see forwards moving around them. I want bodies in motion.
Yeah.
Because they train for that. The Eels train to be up tempo.
Yeah.
And what we've seen in the first few weeks is pedestrian. What we've seen is a lot of one-out stuff. We've seen minimal shape that's been thrown.
And in that vein, like you said, and as you mentioned in the instant reaction, we saw a shape in like the 56th minute or something like that against the Tigers as our first actual attacking look. But you can't throw shapes for the sake of throwing shapes. You need to start in the middle. You need to be, pushing the advantage line, falling forwards, creating some pressure in the ruck. The moment you can just pull in one defender in the middle, that's when you're going to have space either side of the ruck. And the Eels did not do that against Melbourne for obviously the first half. They did a little bit better in the second half, but didn't do it at all against the West Tigers. We got way too sideways, way too cute, way too just. When I say flat, I don't mean attacking flat, a la, Chris Anderson style. I mean, flat energy-wise. There was no speed, there was no intensity, and the Tigers just, weren't asked any questions. So there are so many little areas for the Parramatta Eels to tidy up, and 1% here, 1% there, 0.5% here, 0.5% off, the interchange, and suddenly you're narrowing the gap between any given team, whether it's the Bulldogs, whether it's the Melbourne Storm, so much. And that's why coaches call them the 1%ers, because individually they don't look like much, but when you start putting it in the spreadsheet and you start crunching the numbers, they add up very, very quickly.
I want to touch on some intangibles too, John, before we get into some of the specifics of our match predictions. I want to see trust from the Eels. I need them to trust their systems. I need them to trust the bloke next to them. I need them to trust and have faith in themselves. All right? I need to have, along with that trust, self-belief. Because I think the Eels last week, you could see the moment that the Tigers scored, any shred of confidence just disappeared.
And they had the Tigers not based on their own intensity, but based on just the random game script. They had the Tigers in a stranglehold for a good portion of that first quarter. Like the West Tigers were coughing the ball up, coming off their line, presenting Parramatta with plenty of opportunities. But like you said, because of that lack of energy, that lack of confidence in both the individual and the man next to them, they could not convert. So I don't know what is the circuit breaker here, but someone has to put their hands up and say, follow me, boys. I'm going to lead the way.
Yeah, look, for me, it comes down to this week. There has to be that good old-fashioned winning the middle. Like, let's get the opponent on the back foot. Let's have them marching backwards. Let's play that up-tempo football, get them marching backwards, and then use those attacking shapes out wide on the back of earning that dominance through the middle. Now, that's not going to happen because once you get into good field position, you've got to have those, far better last tackle options than what we showed last week. But if they can get on top like that, and I think it's going to be really important that the Eels score first this week, because these first 2 weeks, even the game against the Tigers, I think in the trial, they let the opponents get on top early.
Inside the head for them, yeah.
And then it became inside the head. Yeah. So, yep. So I want them to start fast, start dominant, really work towards getting those first points. And if they fall behind, let's see a lot more resilience. Let's see the leaders in this team step up and demand more from their teammates, because those younger players, they're going to follow them. They're going to do everything that's demanded of them. You can see the energy that's there from them, because this is their big chance in the NRL, and they're grabbing it with both hands. So let's see that those senior players can give them that direction and that faith that we need in the team out there. John, I think we're probably ready to give our tips. So how do you see this match going in terms of points? Do you predict the best on-field might be first try score, all that sort of stuff?
The painful reality is, 60s, that on the exposed form of these two teams, even if you just took it on last week and ignored round one and gave the Eels the benefit of the doubt there, what we saw in the last 80 minutes of these two teams, that even without Viliami Kikau and Matt Burton, the Dogs are a 20-plus point better team than the Parramatta Eels right now. But a week is a long time in rugby league, and in that vein, assuming that the coaching staff have been able to address some of the issues with the roster, both from a tangible and intangible standpoint. And that means, player selections, which obviously the Fox could be a consideration there. And then more importantly, the intangibles, because the team, even if you believe that there are, and I say if you believe, I think it is a very fair line of thought to hold the belief that there are significant holes in this roster, that this roster, regardless, in spite of those holes, is still far better than what it is presenting on the field. So I'm torn, because realistically, I think the Dogs probably end up winning by 16 to 18 points. but that's just based on what we've seen. And if the Eels can actually figure something out here and can roll up their sleeves and can maybe even just strip back the way they play and put a lot of emphasis early on and just hammering towards the middle of the corridor, like the middle corridors, which means, forwards fronting up through the ruck, hunting in pairs, hunting in pods. It means that halves and back rowers really emphasising that unders line, going back towards the ruck to just create that building pressure towards the interior of it. Then will open up and strip away numbers later in the game. I think that's where I want to see the Eels really make a point of emphasis, and if they can do that, maybe they can squeeze a win. So, like I said, realistically, the Dogs free try favourites here based on what we've seen, even without those two players. But if I'm going to buy into the Parramatta Eels, I think they win this one. I'd love to see a flip of that 2022 game, 34-6, and see us have the big ambush. But if we win by 2 to 4 points, 60s, I'll take it. And so that's probably where I'm going to go this week with the Eels 24-20 victors. First try scorer, just for the spice, because he's not a listed player in the top 17, Josh Adokar. And he scored a hattie against the Eels in that game back in 22. So if he can bag multiple tries in this one, I'll be very, very happy. So that's my score. That's my first try scorer. Best on field. I legitimately don't have a best on field this week, 60s. I just want someone to stand up and say, I'm going in, follow me. So that's who my best on field is. It's the player that puts their hand up and says, I'm going into the breach. Who's coming with me?
Okay. So just touching on a couple of things there. You spoke about the Dogs being 16 to 20 point better team than the Eels. They're really a team where, they've got some star players there, but they're extracting a lot out of a group of players who had been fringe first graders.
It shows you how much effort carries you because, there's some good first graders there alongside the stars, but, Bailey Hayward, Marcelo Montoya, Toby Sexton, Jacob Preston obviously has made his name now, but he started as a nobody. Max King's just a solid first grader that rolls up his sleeves and makes a big difference that way. Curtis Moran, Kurt Mann. Harry Hayes is a talented youngster, but Daniel Salukafita, who comes in this week, he was a cast off from the Roosters and from South Sydney, I believe. So buying into what your coach is selling, geez, it goes a long way, doesn't it, mate?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the other thing too that they do really well is they're really committed in defence, and I think they've got one of the best scramble defences in rugby league.
Easily, it's right up there, yeah.
So, because look, there will be opportunities that you get against the Dogs. You just got to find a way to finish them off because, as I said, they keep fighting all the way back. They keep scrambling. So, take the most of their opportunities. Look, I agree that on exposed form, they're at least a 20-point better team than the Eels. Probably a 30-point better team. With those players out, maybe that brings them back to a 16 or 20-point better team on exposed form thus far this year. But those players are out. And the Eels potentially have at least, maybe that change, perhaps that change on the wing with Josh Adokar. That's, of course, yet to be confirmed, but it's certainly been rumoured. John, I think this is a line in the sand moment for Parramatta. If they turn up the way they have in the first two rounds and perform the way they have, you will get a similar result to the first two rounds. If they execute what they've been working on so hard throughout the preseason and through this week in preparation for the match, you'll get a closer game. You'll get something that's worthy of a rivalry clash. I think that's what we're heading towards, something worthy of a rivalry clash. I think if the Eels play that way, where they show this game really does mean something to them and the jersey means something to them, more importantly, then we're going to get both teams scoring, I think, in the mid-20s, like 26-24, toss of the coin, with home game. This is only on the proviso that the Eels find a way to get away from the last couple of weeks' form. that they've got the players there that can still, even without Mitch Moses, can still execute much better than what they have been. And if they do that, maybe they're a chance of winning by 2 points in a relatively high-scoring game. But, of course, if we get the same as the first 2 weeks, then we know what the result's going to be, because this Dogs team is playing with confidence, even with those players out. So my prediction for best on field for the Eels, it's, I'm going to go with the incoming Dean Hawkins this week. I'm going to go with him being instrumental. And when it comes to first try scorer, I'm hoping we're just the first, the team scored first in this match. Yeah. And if that does happen, I'll go with Zach Lomax, because one of the things they have to do is do what they train to do, which is involve the bloke, involve the star recruit. They haven't involved him at all. He's had to come in looking for the football. And there's nothing wrong with a star player coming in looking for the football, but he shouldn't be looking at doing that because the ball's just not getting out to him in any other circumstance. So, so I think that's where we're at. John, that pretty much wraps up our preview. Just a reminder, no matter what platform you're on, like and subscribe. A reminder as well that we're there at Parramatta Leagues Club, 1:45 p.m. on Sunday in Sturlows with our pre-match show. Really look forward to being able to present that and to meet some of our wonderful listeners, our wonderful viewers that are there. So don't be shy. Come up, say good day. I won't say no to a beer being brought for me either, just quietly. But apart from that, John, go you mighty Eels.